Hello and welcome to the world of sports psychology. Can sports make you more intelligent? Effects of adaptive coordination training, for example, Life-Kinetic or dancing, and effects of aerobic training, for example, walking. In the past few years, I think it all began in 2008 when Yegi and colleagues published their study on the effects of a N-back working memory training. In the past few years, there's been a renaissance, a rebirth of the field of cognitive training. Until 2008, many scientists were convinced that improving fluid intelligence wouldn't be possible at all. Fluid intelligence at core is your reasoning ability, is your ability to process big amounts of information very fast and to solve problems and finally to make good decisions. So obviously it's a very important ability, which is important not only at school but also in everyday life. So many scientists were convinced it's not possible to improve fluid intelligence. It's been viewed as a trait, a personality factor which cannot be improved by training, or maybe a little bit improved but not seriously. But with the development of computerized working memory training programs, like for example the N-back training, or training programs to improve executive functions, which is about your ability to control your attention. And one program which produced really interesting results was the task switching training developed and evaluated by Kabach and Krey. By the way, if you're interested in all these studies, I'll put the links on the literature section of the website. With the development of all these programs, more and more scientists became hopeful that maybe fluid intelligence is trainable to a significant and meaningful degree. Nevertheless, all these programs have one big obstacle. Working memory trainings or trainings to improve executive functions are not making fun. They are really boring, they are monotonous, and at the same time they are very difficult, because the difficulty level rises the better you become. So the training programs are adaptive. The better you get, the more difficult the tasks become. And this combination of monotonous tasks and very difficult tasks makes it really hard to motivate participants. So wouldn't it be great if we were able to embed a cognitive training in a motoric training? Because especially young children have a natural desire to move, to learn new movements. So what about an adaptive coordination training? You have to learn a lot of new movements, which stresses and thereby hopefully improves your executive functions, your ability to control your attention, and that correlates with fluid intelligence. That this might indeed work could be shown by Matthias Grünke, who conducted a randomized training study with children aged 9 to 12 having learning disabilities. So it's been a group which is known to be worse in intelligence tests than the average. And therefore they thought, well, this might be the right sample for a intervention to rise fluid intelligence. One group of children, the control group, played typical games which are usually played in sport lessons, like dodgeball, steeplechase, etc. The 19 kids of the experimental group were trained with Life-Kinetic, which is nothing else but an adaptive coordination program, which has become more and more popular in Germany because very prominent German sports stars have included it into their training program. For example, the players of Borussia Dortmund or the German skiing star Felix Neureuter. So what did they have to do? One task, for example, was to take 2 balls, 1 ball per hand, and you have to throw the 2 balls right up. But you don't catch them with the same hand you've been throwing them. No, you have to cross your arms and then you have to catch the balls. Well, this is not too hard, but the idea of this Life-Kinetic is, as soon as you master this task, as soon as it becomes routine, you have to switch to the next more difficult level. So maybe you've crossed your arms with the right hand up, so next time you have to cross your arms with the left hand up, and then you have to switch between the two, one time right hand up, next time left hand up. So it gets more and more difficult, and you continuously have to be concentrated. There is no automation. It's always learning new movements, and so it's always stressful for your attention control system, for your executive functions. The children of both groups attended 15 sessions which were 25 minutes long, and usually they trained 2 times per week, so 2 25-minute sessions per week, which is really no long intervention. Nevertheless, there have been really interesting effects of this training because moderate effect sizes could be observed for a attention test, which was the D2 test, which is often used to diagnose ADHD. And of course, for an ADHD diagnosis, many more tests have to be conducted. And they observed effects on a test on fluid intelligence, which was the number linking test from Oswald, which in fact is quite simple. You are presented a crowd of numbers and you have to link the numbers beginning with 1, and then you have to search for 2 and where's the 3 and so on. So it's all about fast thinking, which as well is a core ability in respect to fluid intelligence. And in both tests, in the attention control test and in the fluid intelligence test, the Life-Kinetic group, so the adaptive coordination training group, clearly outperformed the control group. And in respect to the very short duration of the training program, these effects are really very interesting, especially because the transfer from motoric tasks and learning new motoric movements to fluid intelligence and attention control is really far. However, we have to be very careful with the results. It's been a nice little study, and from a methodological point of view, also quite well done. But of course, it's just one study up to now, and it will be very interesting to see if those results can be replicated. if learning new movements might improve your fluid intelligence, what about dancing, and especially learning to dance? In fact, this is an adaptive coordination training as well. So maybe we could observe effects of learning difficult, especially difficult dance moves on fluid intelligence or executive functions as well. Up to now, there are not really many well-done studies on this topic, but as people get older, there's more and more interest in alternative ways to keep our brains in good shape. And one way to do so might be to learn to dance. One very interesting study was conducted by Ken Kimura and Noriko Hotsumi and was published in 2012 in Psychology of Sport and Exercise. And in this study, 65 to 78-year-old participants were randomly assigned to two groups. One group was the so-called freestyle dancing group. In this group, they had to learn single dance moves. And in the second group, the so-called combination group, the seniors had to learn the same movements, but those movements were combined in a choreography. This, of course, is much more demanding for your cognitive flexibility. You not only have to think of how to do this one single movement, but you have to keep in mind which movement has to be done in which moment. So this is much more stress for your working memory, for your executive functions. And directly after the 40-minute dance session, all participants had to solve a task-switching task, which is a classical task to measure executive functions. And it demands cognitive flexibility because you have to switch very fast between two different tasks. And the group which performed the more difficult dancing lesson, the group which had to learn the combination of the single movements, this group clearly outperformed the group in which the cognitive demands weren't that high. So this is an interesting hint on the acute effects of a dancing intervention for seniors. But the question is, what about the long-time effects? Are there any effects on cognition for seniors who train dancing for a much longer time? And as I said, there is a lack of really well-done studies. But one study that can give us a hint is the study from Jan Christoph Kattenstroth and colleagues, in which healthy elderly participants aged 60 to 94 years learned dancing for 6 months, 1 hour per week. In comparison to the passive control group, this of course can be criticized because some methodological artifacts can occur, like Rosenthal effect or placebo effects, or maybe one group outperforms the other group because they were getting more attention and so they are more motivated in the post-test. So let's regard the results as a preliminary result and as a hint for future studies. But in many tests, the dancing seniors were really much better than a control group in hand, arm, fine motor performance, or in posture, which is also very important because many elderly people are in high risk to have dangerous fall downs. But also in some measures of cognition, in this case there's been no significant effect for fluid intelligence, but effects on reaction times or on other aspects of cognition could be observed. So maybe dancing is a interesting intervention for elderly people, but looking back to the results of the adaptive coordination training, probably the effects are high if you have to learn new movements. So if you are just doing steps and movements you already know, which are routine, the effects on cognition are probably not that big. Last but not least, some words on aerobic training for seniors. In comparison to adaptive coordination training, demands on our cognitive system when we are jogging or walking or swimming aren't that high. Nevertheless, the results of many studies seem to promote the idea that there is at least a little effect of aerobic training on aspects of cognition like processing speed, executive function, or memory. This is, for example, the result of a meta-analytic review published in 2010 by Smith and colleagues, in which 29 randomized controlled studies were analyzed together, and all in all there were 2,049 participants that took part in these 29 studies. And taken together, the results of all these studies was that there are indeed modest effects on some parts of cognition, like, for example, attention and processing speed, executive function, and memory, and less or no effects, as it seems, on working memory. But why are there effects at all? Well, it seems like aerobic training promotes the production of you could say a brain fertilizer, which is called BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this seems to lead to brain growth, at least in some parts, like, for example, the hippocampus, which is very important for our memory. And that this is the case could be shown in the study, very famous study from Erickson and colleagues. Exercise training increases size of hippocampus and improves memory. It's been published in February 2011. And in this study, it could be shown that after a aerobic training intervention for 1 year, 3 days per week, beginning with 10 minutes and increased by 5 minutes per week. So at the time of week 7, the duration of the training was 40 minutes. And the 60 participants of this aerobic training exercise, again, these were seniors. On average, they were about 68 years. And in this group, a growth of the hippocampus could be observed in comparison to a group which were just stretching and doing some yoga movements. So this group had no aerobic exercise. The growth of the hippocampus was 2% in the aerobic group. In the stretching group, the hippocampus decreased about 1.5%, which is quite normal at this age. So this study was the first study to show that even at an older age, an important part of the brain, the hippocampus, can grow as a result of aerobic exercise. So that's it for today. Hear you next time.